Okay, it's 4:01, so we will call the meeting to order. I will begin by saying that we acknowledge that we are gathered today on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabeg, Haudenosaunee, Lenapewauk, and Attawandaron peoples. We honor and respect the history, languages, and culture of the diverse Indigenous people who call this territory home. We acknowledge all the treaties that are specific to this area: the Two-Row Wampum Belt Treaty of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy Silver Covenant Chain, the Beaver Hunting Grounds of the Haudenosaunee Nanfan Treaty of 1701, the McKee Treaty of 1790, the London Township Treaty of 1796, the Huron Tract Treaty of 1827 with the Anishinaabeg, and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum of the Anishinaabeg and Haudenosaunee. The three indigenous nations that are neighbors to London are the Chippewas of the Thames First Nation, Oneida Nation of the Thames, and the Munsee Delaware Nation, who all continue to live as sovereign nations with individual and unique languages, cultures, and customs. And the City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing, or advisory committee meetings and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. To make a request specific to this meeting, please contact cpsc@london.ca. And now I will look to committee to see if there are any disclosures of pecuniary interest. Councillor Hillier.
Yes, I just need to recuse myself on 5.1, number 1, the special events policies, as my family puts on an event in Victoria Park.
Thank you, Councillor. So we will pull number 1 from the deferred matters list so that you can recuse yourself on that. Any other councillors or looking to declare? Seeing none, I will move to the consent items. I am going to pull items 2.3 and 2.4. That leaves 3 remaining consent items. Would any member like those pulled? Councillor Hillier.
I was moving them, sorry.
Okay, thank you for that. Not seeing anyone pulling any of them, so I'll look for a seconder as well. Seconded by Councillor Hamou. Any discussion on 2.1, 2.2, 2.5? Councillor Deputy Mayor Morgan, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I just wanted to thank staff for their work on the zoning bylaw patio review. I know that work is not complete yet, but they, in their report, have set forward what I think to be a series of options that is reflective of the kinds of things that business owners are looking for. I certainly know we'd have to have a public meeting and zoning changes. I'm looking forward to the feedback during that process, but I did want to say I think staff have done good work that is very reflective of the types of things that business owners saw during the pandemic, were able to take advantage of, were able to be creative and innovative. And now, hopefully, after the process of public review and public consultation and bylaw changes, we'll have the ability to have some of these things made permanent. And we can see outdoor parking lot patios as a more frequent thing. Obviously, those temporary provisions have been extended to January of 2023, but this looks like all of this can happen. We can provide some certainty to those business owners, and they can invest in the capital for the foreseeable future, pending, of course, the public meeting and approval by this committee and then by council. So I just wanted to make that comment today, and thank staff for their good work on this.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Go ahead, Mayor Holder.
Thanks very much. On that same matter regarding the zoning bylaw patio review, I'll echo the Deputy Mayor's comments with regard to staff's work on this. I think that I think great leadership was shown by council and staff with regards to the extension of the patios during times when it mattered most, but it still matters. And the notion and that we can extend this, I believe, is an idea whose time has come. I'll look forward to taking this to the next steps as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Any other comments? Seeing none? Oh, sorry, Councillor Lewis. I see your little hand. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for recognizing me. I was also going to speak to 2.5, but I think the mayor and the deputy mayor have said all that needs to be said there. This is certainly a step in the right direction, I think, for continued outdoor patio space use. I also wanted to comment on 2.1, the Giwitechak Indigenous Homeless Strategic Program, and I will apologize in advance for what I know is massacring the name there on my pronunciation, but I wanted to just speak to that briefly today. Colleagues will remember that when we got the report back on the Fanshawe winter interim response for homeless individuals, I was able to speak from having visited the site. And while I didn't get to visit this site while it was in operation, I did have an opportunity last week to visit with some of the principals involved at Parkwood Hospital. Councillor Lehman and I met with folks from ATLOSA, from London Health Sciences, as well as from SOHAC. And, I think that this is another report that shows, quite honestly, what a great track we're on to tackling these challenges. We're not done by any stretch of the imagination, but when you look at the results that came out of this initiative, in terms of the number of people who were able to move on to more permanent housing, 13 people moved to housing, 7 permanent, 1 transitional, 4 went back to their families. 7 individuals were able to gain or sustain employment as a result of this. 38, I was going to say 36, but 38 applications for rent geared to income and completion of taxes for these folks were completed there to enable them to continue to access benefits that they might have otherwise been cut off from. So once again, I think that this is, I hope that folks at the province, at the federal level are looking at this success. I know that our staff and council took some criticism about the nature of this program when it started up, but the proof is in the numbers. And those numbers, I think, speak for themselves. A remarkable job has been done by all of those involved to help Indigenous Londoners who have been experiencing homeless, just as we helped Londoners experiencing homeless out at Fanshawe Golf Course over the winter months. So a huge thank you to our staff for helping get this going, but to all of those involved. And I just, if they're watching this evening's meeting, to Dave and Dylan and Bill and the others who met with me last week and took the time to share their experiences and invite me into the healing circle and do a smudging and participate in that way with them. It's greatly appreciated. And I hope that we can continue to build on this for future success and hopefully find a permanent location in the future where this can be an ongoing year-round opportunity to help individuals.
Thank you, Councillor. I see your hand again, Mr. Mayor.
You do, and it is on the first item on the consent agenda. Today we celebrated Indigenous Solidarity Day, and of course this morning the sunrise ceremony, and for the balance of the day at the Green in Old South London, where I had the privilege to say a few words on behalf of council and staff and acknowledge the importance of today. It gives me a chance, Chair, to not just acknowledge the work that our staff and our Indigenous communities have come together to help support the Giwitechak Indigenous Homeless Strat Plan, but it also gives me the opportunity to remind our federal officials, who I think have been very helpful in working with us in terms of dealing with Indigenous homelessness, of the need to recognize London with an Indigenous designation. It's certainly something that I have stressed over the last 3 years on behalf of council to our federal government. The minister responsible for housing has heard us clearly. It has not happened yet. I know we will continue to put that appropriate pressure on the federal government to get that designation because of our significant homeless population within the Indigenous community. And this would go a long way to unlocking funds, additional funds, and support the spirit of what this strategic plan is intended to do. So that's my call out to our federal order of government to work with us continuously on this Indigenous designation in London.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Any other comments or questions on the consent items? I'm glad, from the chair, I'll say I'm glad that people brought up item 2.1, the Indigenous Homelessness Strategic Plan. It's so important, and I'm glad, Mr. Mayor, that you will continue to do that advocacy for London to be an Indigenous and designated Indigenous community. This is in my mind, an extension of what did take place under winter response. To see an Indigenous-led, culturally sensitive program that is reconnecting people to their community and to their traditions and their culture. I did visit the site just before it opened up. I was pleased to be able to drop off some donations at the site, and to see the passion is a word that's thrown around a lot, but it was passion and joy in the work that they were about to embark on. And I know many of the good people at LOSA, and that's how they approach their work every day, to see them involved in this. And again, they led the winter response program, to see them leading this as well and working closely with City Hall. And I just have to say, it's a testament to the hard work that's gone on over the last 8 years at City Hall to create, foster, nurture, and build a relationship with our neighbors in the 3 First Nations community closest to London, but also the community here in London that identify as Indigenous peoples. To see the dedication that our city staff have taken in ensuring that that relationship is, again, nurtured and not something to ever take for granted, and not something to ever say we're done, because it's never done. As we all know, with our own personal relationships, it takes constant work. So very happy with this report in particular. And we do have a mover and a seconder for all of the consent items. So I will call the vote on that.
Madam Chair, I'll vote yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Chair Cassidy.
Oh, yes.
Are you just voting on 2.1, 2.2, and 2.5?
Yes, Councillor Helmer. Thank you. Councillor Helmer votes yay.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Takes us to 2.3, the Fire Master Plan Action Plan, and I will go to Ms. Cheryl Smith to get us started on that.
Thank you, and through the chair, I'm pleased to present the City of London's Fire Master Plan Action Plan tonight. I have with me Chief Hamer, Deputy Chief Hayes, Deputy Chief Heptich, and Deputy Chief Hunt to answer any of your questions. I'm going to turn it over to Chief Hamer to provide you with a brief overview of the plan that's before you today. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Ms. Hamer.
Hi, and thank you for allowing me to make a few comments before we discuss the Fire Master Plan. We're extremely excited and extremely proud to bring this plan forward, it's an evidence-based, community risk-driven plan that will guide our priorities of the London Fire Department for the next 10 years. We've tried to make it not about short-term solutions, but it's about what we know in the future and planning accordingly to ensure our department is positioned to meet the needs of our community. The last few years have taught us many things. One for certain is that we never know what the future holds. And the Fire Master Plan is a living, fluid document that will alter and adapt as needed as we continue to take into account all the risks in our community alongside our data, current trends, and growth patterns to allow us to mitigate the risks and move forward. We have great confidence that this plan will allow us to provide essential, effective, exceptional service to the citizens of London. As a bit of background, this master plan and subsequent action plan was developed through a 5-stage process. We completed a risk assessment, community risk assessment mitigation strategies document, community engagement, including Londoners, counselors, and staff through surveys and in-person discussions, development of a fire master plan, and step number 5, the fire master plan action plan, which is a bit of a mouthful, I would say. The fire service as a whole and the way we deliver fire services is evolving, and we are extremely proud to include strategies in our action plan that involve not only public fire safety education, fire safety standards, emergency response, and strategic priorities. However, also includes a large section on staff and personnel development, including physical and mental health and wellness of all of our staff. We are extremely thrilled to be working with our anti-racism and anti-oppression team to continue to develop a workplace culture that's welcoming. And we look forward to work with many city services and all LFD employees as we continue to build that cohesive culture. In this area, we are leading in the fire service and have placed priority on our staff. It is not only an investment in our community, it's an investment in our service and an investment in our people. This living document and the actions within will continue to be monitored and reported on annually. Priorities and actions may shift when required, and comprehensive business cases, updates to the strat plan, and to our multi-year budget submissions may be required. We are extremely excited to table this master fire plan. And as was said earlier, we look forward to your comments, and I have all my deputies with me today to assist with any and all questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Hamer. Are there any questions for the chief or any comments about the fire master plan action plan? Oh, Councillor Hamou, go ahead.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the report, Ms. Hamer. I really enjoyed reading through it. I have a couple questions and I have a comment. Firstly, I just wanted to comment about education and just tell you that your efforts are actually working. I have a story about my daughter coming home from Safety Village one year. I think it was when she was in grade 1, and she implemented all the things she learned by cutting the second floor screen from her window so that she'd have a fire escape, and it caused quite a bit of chaos. My husband didn't like it, so now there's a big hole in the front that we haven't fixed. But it's something where kids learn it and then they implement it right away, and I think that goes to the testament of, you know, how kids are learning about fire safety. On that tangent of learning and education, I was wondering if you have any programs for newcomers, as I think that there may be some challenges around fire safety with newcomers.
Chief Hamer?
Through the chair, thank you for the story. I know we teach kids a lot of things, and we hope they don't go home and do everything we teach them, but thank you for the story. As for programs for newcomers, we are currently, as part of our strat plan, we're building more and more programs all the time. And we are really trying to get out into the community to not only schools, seniors, et cetera, but trying to get to all of different groups as we can. And we welcome the calls into the fire department to have us come out to those events, because as you said, education is the best thing that we can do. And the more people that we can reach in our city, we definitely will have a safer city moving forward.
Thank you.
And that goes to the second question I have, that I believe on page 33, 3.2, you've got some language, you've got some statistics there on language and how you guys communicate to the rest of the population in London. And I was wondering if you have any kind of hiring and recruitment strategies right now that is focusing on hiring people that are within those communities so that you can communicate better within those communities. Chief?
Through the chair, thank you for that question. We do, and we are working really closely currently with the ARAO division to improve our hiring practices and to reach more people to to pull people in to apply for fire and to also become interested in it, because it's very, through different cultures, there's different thoughts about the fire department. So we're working really closely with ARAO.
Okay, and I've got one more and I'm done, I promise. Currently, the city's investing in mental health and homelessness. So we're doing the affordable housing, and we're doing wraparound services in some of our buildings. And I was just wondering if our investments in mental health and homelessness is going to help the fire department. I don't know if there's any research on mental health and calls, or if that brings down your calls, or if it impacts it in any way, shape, or form.
I don't have any specific data on that. Sorry about that. But any work that we can do in the community is going to help. But unfortunately, right now, that specific data I don't have.
Okay, thank you. That's all for me.
Thank you, Councillor Hamu. Thank you, Chief. Mr. Mayor, go ahead.
Thanks very much. On that same stats page, on page 33, under age of various groups, I was we're troubled to see deaths at any age, and when we see the fire fatalities with older adults 65 plus, and the predominance of 15 to 64s, percentages are one thing. Are you able, Chief, to provide us specific numbers of fatalities that can bring some substance to those percentages?
Chief?
Through the chair, I don't have those with me. My Deputy Chief Heptich from Fire Prevention may have them at his fingertips. If not, we can definitely get those numbers for you.
Yes.
Deputy Chief Heptich, do you have any of those numbers?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chief Hamer. Through the chair, with regards to the question, Mr. Mayor, are you asking if the fatalities that we've had in the past couple of years?
Well, Chief, what I'm looking at is this on page 33, your first chart, where you indicate that number of, we've got a provincial population, but I'm particularly interested in London's figures in 2021, 2020, in terms of hard numbers. Do we have those where we say X number of people died, and then those percentages, assuming they apply specifically to London, one can draw one's own conclusions from that as well?
Yes, sir. We do have for 2020, we had 2 fire fatalities. And then in 2021 here in London, we had 1 fire fatality.
So Chair, through you, thank you. So we've got the provincial stats. I mean, any deaths caused by fire, particularly preventable fire, and I'm not talking about lightning and the like, but it still speaks to the need, as I know the fire department's always stressed, the need to for working fire alarm or smoke alarms and checking. And maybe this is a gentle reminder to everyone: if you haven't done your spring, maybe you'll tell us if today is that day. But we always say spring and fall is when you need to change your batteries. How do our numbers of 2 in 2020 and 1 in 2021, acknowledging that any deaths are extremely sad, how does that compare to other large cities in the province, if you have any comparators?
Chief or Deputy Chief?
Through the chair, I don't have the exact statistic in front of me, but I believe we are lower than the provincial average based on population.
It would, yeah, I'm not sure how we can draw conclusions around fatalities where there's such a limited number, but Chief, I do appreciate the comment. That's it for me, Chair. Thank you. And thank you, Chiefs.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll go to you, Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you.
Wonderful. So I'm looking at page 38 of the written agenda, noticing that pretty steady climb in the number of calls, and with the exception of 2020, So that's a year that looks like lower than otherwise expected. And so my question through you to our staff is there a particular reason for that they might have identified?
Chief?
Page 36.
Through the chair, yes. In 2020, for a period of time when COVID was starting, we reduced the number of tiered responses or medical calls that we responded to when COVID was new and we were trying to figure out what was next. As well, what we found was during COVID, when people weren't out and about, our car accidents decreased quite a bit. So that would account for the lower number in 2020.
Okay, that certainly makes sense. And can I ask you what you anticipate the effect of London's strategy to build inward and upward would have on your team and your planning going forward?
Chief?
Through the chair, it's interesting because when we look at growth, fire looks at it from a very different lens. Inward and upward for the fire department presents a number of challenges. And part of that is we have in our assessment growth cases, a new aerial company coming early 2024, and we're building staff for that now. The other thing that we find with inward and upward is, I'm not sure what page in the document, but some fire departments are starting to track vertical response time as well. So there's a time from when we arrive on scene, and then there's an additional time until we reach the actual patient, whether that's on the 24th floor or the 30th floor. So that's going to add a new dynamic to our metrics that we look at moving forward.
Thank you, Chief. Counselor?
Thank you. Moving on to page 40, we're looking at the proportion of structure fires by major occupancy, and 3/4 of them are residential. And perhaps you can tell us the major cause of a residential fire. Well, I guess I see that on the next page. We're looking at those causes. And I see that about 1/4 of those are undetermined. How difficult is it to determine the cause of a fire?
Chief?
Through the chair, some of the difficulties in determining are working with different agencies. So, and I'm going to turn this over to Deputy Chief Heptich in a second, because I'm sure I won't give all of the information, but I will try my best. In that we have fire prevention inspectors go out, but we also have captains who have been there and district chiefs that have been on scene. And sometimes it's getting the same information together and ensuring that the right information is put in there. And sometimes if that's off, it comes up as undetermined. And with our new ICO system that we're implementing, we are hopeful that that will decrease with the undetermined factor and allow us to have a better understanding of exactly what fires we're looking at. And I will turn it over to Deputy Chief Heptich if he has any more information.
Anything to add, Deputy Chief?
Through the chair, thank you, Chief Hamer. And when we have an undetermined fire, what it means is we have more than one competing hypotheses, so potentially more than one cause. If you cannot provide 100% certainty that one specific item is the cause of a fire, that fire may be deemed as undetermined. And all of our investigators are certified fire investigators to the province of Ontario. So they have a significant level of training and experience in the field. As Chief Hamer said as well, we do work with other agencies, and what we do need to ensure is that we continue to work with them to try and work on that number as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else, Counselor?
Sure, if I may just follow up on that item. So I see that undetermined shows up 2 places on the on the graph, one is within the unintentional, and then there's an other. So I'm presuming, perhaps this is correct, that where it says other undetermined, we can't tell if it was intentional or unintentional, or is there something completely different at play?
Chief?
Through the chair, that's correct. So as Deputy Chief Heptich said, if in that category as well, if there are competing hypotheses and we're not 100% sure, it's noted as undetermined.
Okay, thank you. Are we surprised that 15% of the fires started are suspected arson?
Chief?
Through the chair, I don't think that we'd say we're surprised. Obviously, we'd like to see that number a lot lower, and we'd like to figure out what type of education and what programming we can put in our city to bring that number down.
I see.
Counselor?
Thank you very much. Maybe my last question. So misuse of ignition source, is that like a pot on the stove that's unattended? Or?
Through the chair, I will pass that one over to Deputy Chief Heptich.
Great. Deputy Chief, go ahead.
Through the chair, thank you, Chief Hamer. An example of a misuse of an ignition source would be perhaps misuse of a lighter or perhaps a cigarette, something like that. That would be an example of a misuse of an ignition source. So basically your ignition source is something that creates fire or heat.
Counselor?
Okay. And where would something like some food or oil burning on a stove fall into in this this section of categories?
Chief or Deputy Chief?
Through the chair, that would fall under unattended cooking.
Okay. I'm sorry, I didn't see that on here. But thank you. That would be an excellent category to place it. Okay. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I appreciate the work, and I hope that we achieve some great gains through this planning exercise. Thanks to our staff.
Thank you, Counselor. Any other comments or questions? No, just want to say thanks as well. Oh, sorry, Counselor Helmer. Go ahead, Counselor Helmer. I see your hand.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to ask Chief Hamer and the deputy chiefs at a high level, what kind of big changes or significant changes beyond the addition of the aerial company to deal with the greater number of units that are in tall buildings, and are we expecting to see over the period for this plan in terms of the vehicles, the number of people who are deployed and the number of stations? What's the big picture look like compared to how things are today?
Chief?
Through the chair, other than the aerial, I think, as I said in my opening remarks, the fire service is evolving. And as we know, we're one of the largest growing cities in Southern Ontario, and that in itself brings forward a lot of challenges. So I think one of the big shifts you're going to see is more education in the community. One of our actions is to train our suppression staff as well to be able to get out to more schools, more senior centers, more groups, more camps, more programs, all of that stuff, just to bring the education out. The other thing is one of the risks that was identified for us was the aging downtown core. So we've embarked on a pilot that has put some of our fire prevention inspectors down at City Plaza. Our thought behind it is to have them visible so that they're there for education, enforcement when needed. And if that works well, we're looking at putting possibly fire prevention inspectors in other places around the city to become more community driven. And the other big change for us is implementing a bit of a total wellness strategy. And it's a bit of an outside the box thinking for a fire master plan to have such a large portion dedicated to staff development. And for us, it's about the mental health and mental health resiliency piece as we move forward as well. So I think those are the big changes you're going to see throughout this fire master plan, alongside collaboration with staff, as we talked about at the beginning with I can't remember which one it was, around the winter response. Fire partnered with other community partners, and it was just an amazing success. And I think you'll see us collaborate more in that type of work.
Thank you. Councillor Helmer?
Thank you very much for the response. In terms of the location of the stations and how expansion will happen in the future, especially as we're adding units in already built up areas. Pardon my daughter, she's requesting a song. Can you give me a sense of what you think that looks like over the next little while?
Through the chair, I think you asked what we think the station locations look like in the next little while. Okay.
Yeah, and generally what the capital growth looks like. Yeah.
One of our actions is to take part in a bit of a location relocation study, because I don't believe that just because the city grows means we just keep throwing up fire halls. I think it needs to be revisited. We need to look at the growth patterns and the trends and what we're seeing to determine whether it's a new fire hall location that's needed, or do we just need to relocate to try and mitigate emergency services within our city. So we're looking forward in taking part in that relocation/location study to see what works best for the City of London with the growth that we're seeing.
Thank you very much. Generally, like, I guess, big picture, because we don't have the budget stuff in front of us, what are the sort of financial implications, the order of magnitude of what we might be expecting to come forward in the multi-year budget process, and updates to the capital plan related to this master plan?
Chief.
Thank you. Through the chair. So with this being a living document, what we're planning on is to review it every year, and anything that's outside the current approved budget will be submitted with a comprehensive business case with the either the next multi-year budget or the one after that, depending on the appropriate process at that time. As far as a total number, I don't have that statistic, because I don't know, as we review every year, what's going to be needed.
Councillor.
Okay, one last question from me. Just in terms of the response times you see in the report and the action plan that held pretty steady over the past few years in around 6 minutes, give or take a few seconds. Where do you think that that's going over the life of the master plan? Do you think it's going to stay around that level, or do you think there's going to be pressure pushing response times either up or down? And how do you go about determining what the best target response time is for a city like London?
Go ahead, Chief.
Thank you. Through the chair. So the average response time metric is just going to be one of the pieces of data that we look at. Realizing that if that starts to increase, there's a whole myriad of pieces to that total response time that we would need to look at to see what's causing that increase. It could be traffic congestion. It could be, like I said, if we add that additional vertical response time to that, or it could be something to do with our dispatch system or the turnout time or where the apparatus is located in the city. So we think it's a valuable piece of information, that average response time metric, to keep an eye on, but it's only one piece of data that we look at amongst a whole bunch of other data.
Any follow-up to that, Councillor?
Nope. Thanks very much for the report and for all the great work that the fire department does every day.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Any other comments or questions for the chief? Councillor Hillier, and then I'll go to you, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, just one question for the chief. It's just regarding my ward and response times for the innovation park and industrial areas. We have the Maple Leaf plant coming online shortly. And we were scheduled to have a brand new fire hall, I believe Commissioners near Old Victoria. And I just wanted to check to see if that was still on track, or are we trying to find a new location?
Chief.
Thank you. Through the chair, nope, we are planning on moving ahead with that fire hall, Station 15. With supply chain issues, et cetera, we are currently planning that to open early 2024.
Thank you, Chief.
Excellent, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Mr. Mayor.
Well, thank you, Chair. I think when the questions are done, I'm prepared to move receipt of the report.
Appreciate that, Mr. Mayor. Any other questions while I look for a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Hamou. And I'm not seeing any more discussion. Thank you again to the chief and all the deputy chiefs who came out to the meeting to provide us with the answers to a lot of questions. So very, very well done. Thank you. And with that, I will call the question.
Chair,
I'll vote yes as well.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Councillor Helmer.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
All right, that takes us to item 2.4. We do have a delegation request with that. I'm going to go first to Mr. Katolik to give us an introduction to this item, and then we will, hold on one second. Okay, so we will hear from Mr. Katolik, and then I will go to the committee for a decision on the delegation request as well. So go ahead, Mr. Katolik.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have with me tonight Nicole Musico and Mark Hefferton from our policy unit. And Mark will provide a high-level summary of the Toronto model, as well as a summary of some of the operational improvements we are planning. I'd also like to thank the members of the tenant-landlord-tenant task force that sent in very positive emails on the report today. So over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Oris. And good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. As Oris suggested, I will do a very high-level overview of Rent Safe Toronto and then make some operational improvements as per our analysis of Rent Safe. Very brief background. This staff report and presentation is being received for information purposes, and this report is in response to an October 5th, 2021 council resolution directing staff to investigate the feasibility of a Rent Safe Toronto type system for the City of London. So what is Rent Safe? Rent Safe was established in 2017 to maintain apartment building standards through enforcement. I will touch on four main components for Rent Safe. Number one, building registration. Number two, tracking service requests. Number three, conducting building evaluations. Number four, conducting building audits. So number one, building registration. This is a key component of Rent Safe Toronto, is that it acts as a landlord registry. Properties are required to register their building annually and pay an annual renewal fee. Number two, second main component of Rent Safe is service requests. So with Rent Safe Toronto, tenants that have concerns, they're directed to speak to their landlord first. From there, if they get no suitable response from the landlords, Rent Safe basically provides building owners a process to receive work orders so that the work orders get tracked and tenant service requests are properly logged. Also with service requests, there's two components of that. Really the website. So Rent Safe Toronto launched an interactive website, and that allows tenants to view and track service requests from tenants for building improvements and repairs. Secondly, they also have a 311 phone system to submit complaints. So obviously the 311 system is of course the best option for those that do not have web access. So the when the customer service representative receives a call through the 311 system, they will then collect tenant contact information, and the tenant's going to ask questions and then ultimately generate a service request for their apartment building. The third main component of Rent Safe Toronto is building evaluations. So essentially this happens once every 3 years. The City of Toronto evaluates buildings, and during those building evaluations, city staff inspect and also score the condition of common areas, mechanical areas, systems, security systems, parking lots, parking fields, as well as exterior grounds. Fourth and final component of Rent Safe is that building audits. So with low scoring buildings that score below 50% during building evaluations are subject to more intensive building audit. So in terms of staff review, staff went through a fairly lengthy analysis of the Rent Safe system and essentially tried to compare apples to apples with the City of London. So many of you may be familiar with the Amanda system. It's a common government software for tracking compliance. So we did an analysis in terms of service requests for apartment buildings here in the City of London. So city staff in the planning department looked at apartment interior complaints, the data. So in the 4,700 approximately complaints that have been issued to date in 2022, less than 1% of those complaints were actually the interior of apartments. So less than 1% of the interior complaints are coming in from apartment dwellers. I also want to touch on a very important component of this analysis, the staff report and presentation, is the Tenant Landlord Task Force, or TLT. The Tenant Landlord Task Force was formed here in London, February 2022. Since then, the task force has met monthly with the goal of exchanging information, presenting ideas to improve process and discuss best practices. And ultimately, it's really the group is about maintaining the feedback and information process between parties and maintain high standards for rental accommodation. So the group's goal is really about strengthening relationships between landlords and tenants. I won't get into a full exhaustive list of who the stakeholders are with the Tenant Landlord Task Force, but it does include representatives from the City of London, Acorn, Western University, LDI, London Development Institute, Lifespin, Neighborhood Legal Services, Mission Services, St. Leonard's Community Services, etc. So through our analysis of Rent Safe, the City of London staff has determined that Rent Safe Toronto is really about licensing rental units and really outreach and improved communications. Through our analysis, the City of London staff are recommending a number of operational improvements. So they've been outlined in the staff report, and I will touch on a couple of these improvements here today. They fall in 4 categories. Number 1, website improvements. Number 2, inclusive landlord and tenant communications. Number 3, creating a centralized inbox and dedicated phone number. Number 4, communication improvements to landlords. So quickly, the website improvements. Number 1, staff is suggesting that a new website would improve the process of registering complaints, providing a single destination for all information related to landlords and tenants. One of our takeaways through our analysis is that it's often cumbersome for tenants to register complaints on our website. So we're trying to provide a clear process for tenants to submit those complaints and create a transparent information flow for those complaints. Number 2, we're looking to provide more inclusive landlord-tenant communication. So trying to avoid any barriers with regards to accessibility in customer service and transference of information and communications with regards to both landlord and tenant matters. So forms will be compliant with accessibility standards, available digitally as well as in hard copy. And the goal is to avoid barriers to customer service. Number 3, create a centralized inbox and dedicated phone number. So really, we one of our takeaways looking at the Rent Safe Toronto is that here in London, we can really create that centralized email inbox where tenants can contact the city and submit complaints about bylaw violations. So staff are suggesting a dedicated email, such as myhome@london.ca, is something that we've suggested, as well as providing a dedicated phone number for collecting tenant contact information, allow tenants to ask specific questions, and of course, ultimately log tenant service requests. And the fourth operational improvement would be basically communication improvements with landlords. So this may involve creating a system whereby tenants and landlords are provided a self-certification checklist. The idea is that bylaw enforcement could be proactive. So these checklists will clearly state these are the city standards and expectations for exterior building condition, common area cleanliness, yard maintenance, etc. So in conclusion, upon analysis of the Rent Safe Toronto program, Civic Administration does not recommend this program for London because it is in essence a licensing program for apartment units. However, in its analysis of the Rent Safe Toronto program, the City of London staff have identified a number of improvements that can be made to its current properties standard systems. The Tenant Landlord Task Force, or TLT, have been instrumental in creating these staff recommendations, and the task force will continue to improve processes and discuss best practices with regards to maintaining building standards and rental housing in the City of London. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hefferton. So before I open it up for discussion, I'm going to look to the committee about the delegation request, and I think that we should deal with that first. So I will look to committee to see what they would like to do with this delegation request. So I have Councillor Hammoum moving that we hear the delegation. Do I have a second? Is that you, Mr. Mayor, seconding that? Okay, so I'll call the question on that.
I'm in favor.
I'll vote yes, Chair.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
Great. So we have Ms. Devine here with us again, I believe. We've heard from you before, and that is wonderful. So you have 5 minutes, as you know, to address the committee, and go ahead.
Thank you, Councillor. First, I'd like to start off by responding to a few things Mr. Hefferton had to say regarding his reasons why they don't feel this program is needed. In response to the interior of buildings in general, the reason it's such a low number there is many people aren't aware of the process of how to get help. But I can say from experience, I'm currently sitting in an apartment owned by York Properties, and they've got an ancient air conditioner, windows that are from the 80s, and sliding doors that are broken. And this is just one example. And in regards to being just apartment buildings, this needs to be applied to property owners that buy up homes and subdivide them as well. They are the worst for buying up properties and just letting them run down. So with that said, many rental investment companies and general property investment corporations such as FireHigh are flocking to cities such as London, which do not currently have any form of rent-safe programs or landlord licensing in order to avoid having to be accountable rental property owners. A large number of these investors are from outside of London and go so far as to use the excuse that they're not local and so they're not seeing what's going on, and then they blame whatever management they have in place, saying that they're not being kept properly informed. These property owners regard these rental properties as income only. Once they have invested in the purchase of the property, they don't feel any obligation to invest proper maintenance to keep the properties up to proper and livable conditions, but they continue to demand top dollar rental prices. Until London City Council creates and enforces a program to stop these property owners from taking advantage of desperate tenants, we will continue to see people and families living in overpriced, rundown, unhealthy rental units. And I must emphasize on the need for enforcement of any program that is developed, as I can say from full experience that while inspections are completed and property owners are informed of infractions they are expected to resolve, that's typically where the system ends. I can say this based on experience, as I've had the London Health Office, the Fire Department, the Bylaw Office, all do inspections on my present house, and they've all told me what kind of things they're going to inform my landlord he has to take care of, and then that's where it stops. There's nothing going on. If they were to follow up on any of the things they told them to do, I would have justifiably been demo evicted long before now. Also, the head of the London Acorn wanted to be here today, but was unable to get delegation status on time. So on behalf of him and all of London Acorn, I'd also like to say that if this legislation is properly executed, tenants will be protected and be able to live with dignity. If this legislation is dropped, this city council will have demonstrated its commitment not to the tax-paying citizens of London, but to the profits of property investors, many of which who don't even reside in London. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Ms. Devine. So now I will go to committee, and I see Councillor Helmer's hand.
Thank you. I wanted to start by thanking Mr. Katolik and his team, Mr. Musico and Mr. Hefferton for the work getting it back to us relatively quickly. I did have a couple of questions just about the report, and then I've got a motion that I'd like to put on the floor, contingent on the answers to the questions, which is a bit different from the staff recommendation. So my first question is around consultation directly with the City of Toronto about what kind of outcomes they were seeing in response to rent safe TO. It's one thing to sort of look at how the program is set up and how it's designed, but I wonder if there's been any direct conversations with the staff at Rent Safe TO about how it's going in terms of actually implementing the program and what they've seen in terms of outcomes over the first, I guess, 4 or 5 years that it's been up and running.
Okay, Mr. Katolik.
Thank you. And through the chair, I'd like to defer to Mr. Hefferton, and then I have some comments to make.
Okay, Mr. Hefferton, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Katolik, and through you, Madam Chair. Councillor Helmer, there have been conversations directly with city staff. I don't have those contacts directly, but most of it has been sort of an armchair review. Of course, with COVID times and working from home, there hasn't been any visits to Toronto but there has been phone conversations. It has been a relatively new program, as you suggested. It's approximately 5 years. I do know that they have had an enormous volume of complaints, and obviously there's a scale of large amount of buildings comparison to London. So they have, I believe I'm actually scanning as I'm speaking to try to find some statistics for you, but ultimately I know that they had upwards of 9,000 complaints in one calendar year. And that is specifically to do with rental units, but I will draw your attention to, again, those Amanda numbers that we provided, that in the 1 year, well, let's say just over half of a year, we've only received less than 1% have been pertaining to apartment units in the City of London. So I also to the delegation, I think it's also important to note that one of our takeaways through this process has been that it is cumbersome for tenants to register a complaint. And I know staff has done some sort of trial runs in their efforts to better understand how the website works. So that's why one of our operational improvements is, well, the very first operational improvement is that of the website improvement. So I think that we could have those numbers go up say in our Amanda system, if we were to move forward with these website improvements, as well as the other operational improvements towards better tracking of complaints pertaining to apartment buildings. But I want to reiterate the fact that a real takeaway for us in the review of the system that is rent safe, it is very much a licensing. And ultimately, we don't have the sort of numbers in the City of London that would justify creating a system as involved as rent safe here in the City of London.
Thank you, Mr. Hefferton. Go ahead, Mr. Katolik.
Yes, and through the chair, I'd like to add that prior to Toronto implementing the rent safe program, I had the opportunity to visit Toronto with several London officers, and for a full day we shadowed their officers in doing a apartment building blitz. And what that entailed is prior notification to the owners of the apartment indicating that they will be on site blitzing the exterior and common areas, and have notified all the tenants that should the tenants wish to invite City of Toronto staff into their unit, they are welcome to enter their unit and discuss any issues they're having with the building and specifically with their unit. Now, even doing that, there still is the opportunity for the landlord to fix the problem before the city takes action. So in seeing that, that is very common to our process, where we always say, have you notified your landlord of that problem prior to getting city involved? So there's not much of a difference between our current system and the system that most Ontario municipalities use, in terms of allowing landlords to fix the problem first before municipalities get involved. And after seeing and shadowing in Toronto, we did implement some neighborhood blitzes. We didn't focus that much on apartments because there weren't a lot of apartment issues in London, but we did do a bit of a heat map and identified certain areas of the city which we were getting a lot of property standard complaints, and initiated building or neighborhood blitzes. And what we're recommending through this report is that we continue to do these building blitzes once we identify hotspots in the area where there are valid property standard complaints. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Katolik. Back to you, Councillor Helmer.
Thank you. And I do have a couple of questions. So I did hear what the staff said in the opening presentation. I did read the report, so I don't know that we need to reiterate a lot of those points, but I appreciate the response so far. I wanted to ask about the cost, because there's reference in the report to say it would probably be similar to what the estimate was for licensing all buildings, and that was quite high. I think back to that previous report. So is the idea here that implementing something like Rent Safe London here in the City of London would be very similar in terms of the total number of people required as what was initially assessed, which was the sort of full licensing, and not something which is like every 3 years you're going to have to do a building evaluation. If you score low, you have to have an audit, which is a very different approach than sort of the full licensing that was talked about in the previous reports.
Through you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your question, Councillor Helmer. The idea is that the staffing assessment that was provided in the report prior to this report, I think you made reference to that. Those numbers would still stand. So it would be approximately 37 additional staff. So that is mostly to do with compliance staff and inspections. Obviously, there would be other financial implications if we get into a system where we're creating a communications person similar to Rent Safe Toronto, and that they have, we would create sort of a designated phone number, but we would not go as far as to say create a 311 system that they had, where they would have communications people on the line. So the numbers that you're referencing in this report, as well as the previous report, were mostly pertaining to enforcement and inspections.
Counselor?
And you said 37 people?
Yes, that's what he said. It's in there. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so I think really that's probably enough in terms of questions for me. What I'm going to suggest, colleagues, this is one of these situations that's happened to me a couple times in the past where the staff just don't want to do what I think we should do. That's fine. Sometimes they make recommendations that I don't agree with. And what I think the next step should be for us is to direct the development of a business case so we can look at an actual business case proposal around implementing Rent Safe London. The reason I suggest that is because, making a change like this is going to have some resource implications. So I don't think we should just, without a good sense of the cost, direct it at this point. But, in preparation for this report coming back, I looked into the Rent Safe Toronto program in more detail. One of the things that I did as part of that process was review the year in review report that the City of Toronto put out about Rent Safe Toronto. And you just look at the numbers in that report and it's very encouraging. So as has been mentioned by city staff, the number of complaints has actually gone up quite a lot. And I will say, it's maybe a cliche, but we really should not measure the need for a bridge based on how many people are swimming across the river, right? If it's not a good system right now, of course, people won't use it. And sometimes these failures to report, as was identified by the delegation, has been brought up to me over the years by many, many tenants in my ward and elsewhere in the city, is that these systems are not working very well for tenants. And they find that when they contact people and they try and take action, whether it's at the tribunal or it's a bylaw enforcement issue, they're not satisfied with the results. And so if people are engaging with a system that doesn't seem to be working very well and is very discouraging and they have outcomes that they don't like, it's not surprising to me that that system doesn't have a lot of take-up. And what we see in comparison with Toronto is that they started with around 6,000 complaints in 2017. Now they're up over 10,000. That's an enormous increase as people have become aware of this program and that it seems to be working. When I say it seems to be working, I mean, people make complaints and then within like 3 weeks, these things are closed off. They've done lots of building evaluations. So in the first year, they did like 3,400 building evaluations. That's a lot of buildings to be evaluating. And the scores were not very good, like 65 was the average score. But now in 2021, the average scores of those building evaluations are much higher. They're scoring in the high 70s, in the mid 70s. And so their need for audits is much lower because the actual quality and the condition in these buildings that are being evaluated has gone up. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to ask about outcomes, because we don't want to just license people for no reason, right? We want to implement something like Rent Safe London because it's going to lead to better living conditions for tenants. And in London, we have like 40% of the population is living in rental housing. This is a huge number of people who are living in rental housing. It's actually a higher percentage than it is in Toronto, right? They just have more people, right? So it's a bigger operation. The reason I was asking about the costing, and whether 37 was the right number, is the entire Rent Safe Toronto program. They say they have 33 full-time people for all of the Rent Safe Toronto program, including an executive director, all the staff who work in it. And so it seems to me like it can actually be delivered on a much more affordable basis than the sort of 37 people for London, because I don't think we would need the same number of people as Toronto. And that's why I think it's essential that we get a business case about what do we think the real resource requirements would be to implement something where there are inspections every 3 years, audits for buildings that score poorly, and not we will inspect every building the same frequency with the same intensity, but really we're going to audit, we're going to sample, and then if you have a problem, we're going to put some additional focus on you to get people in a voluntary compliance basis to bring their buildings up to standard. I've been into a lot of rental housing in my life in London. Like I've canvassed a lot of buildings, and a lot of them are in pretty rough shape. And tenants are living not just in units, but in common areas where there's problems. This is not a small issue that requires minor action. I actually think it's quite a big issue, and it's getting worse as the buildings are aging. There's lots of great landlords. Don't get me wrong. There are lots of great landlords that keep their buildings in great condition. But buildings get sold. New landlords take over. Sometimes they disinvest, or they're not really interested in reinvesting in the capital, and they're really just extracting the rental income. And, I think we really have to look very carefully at what we can do in London to improve the living conditions of renters. And I think you look at what the actual results are from Rent Safe TO and the cost for a city the size of Toronto, it's very affordable with the kind of outcomes that they're getting. So I'm still very keenly interested in it. I understand that staff don't think it's a good idea. They don't think we should do that. I do think there'd be some benefits to these things that they're proposing, some of which I think just on their own merits stand pretty well. But I also think it's very telling that, we've got references to the landlord tenant task force as being supportive. And it's like, well, the people I've heard from are the London Development Institute and the Property Management Association. And of course, the people who represent the landlords don't want rent safe London, right? They have certain interests. They don't think they need to be inspected. They don't think they need to have audits. I understand that. But we got to look out for the tenants as well, right? It's not like we just listen to the landlords, and I don't think we should do that. So, I think a business case would be a good step. It doesn't, we're not fully committed to that point. It's going to require some resources. That's what I would suggest. I don't think there's a seconder for that. We can have a business case come forward to the multi-year budget process, and we could take a look at it with the full knowledge of what it's going to cost and what we think the outcomes might be. And I do appreciate the work that the staff have done to get here. It's just sometimes when we have these discussions, they haven't looked at the information, they're like, it's not worth it. I look at the information and I think it's a great idea, and we just have a different opinion on that stuff. I think people are doing great work with the work that they're doing. So hopefully there's a seconder for that, Chair. I wanted to just put on the table right away and see if there was. I may have to actually drop off the meeting soon, so I'll certainly listen to the whole arguments, but if I'm not around to vote for it, I would be sad and probably bring it up at council.
Thanks, Councillor. Mr. Mayor.
I appreciate the questions of Councillor Helmer. Are you still going with technical questions? Because we haven't closed off the PPM, and that seemed like a lot of.
We didn't have a PPM. We just had a delegation, and we listened to that delegation, and now it's up to us.
All right, good. All right, so can you just clarify from Councillor Helmer's standpoint, was he looking for a seconder for that, and then all of that? Will you help just to tell us where we are in the process, please?
So he's proposing a motion. I have not heard yet if there is a seconder. I don't want to kill his motion until we get to hash this out, because I might second it myself from the chair if there isn't a seconder, but I'd like to hear the discussion. So what Councillor Helmer is proposing is not necessarily going against anything that the staff are proposing. Their recommendation is simply to receive their report. They also have talked about some of the things that they are implementing, period, whether or not there's any additional motion. And what Councillor Helmer is proposing is that they come forward with an actual business case. So not to decide to go ahead with a rent safe program here, but come forward to the multi-year budget with a business case for council to determine whether or not they want to go forward with a rent safe program here.
All right, Chair. So if I still have the floor.
Absolutely.
And I won't be seconding the motion, but what I read in the reports, and staff can correct me if I'm wrong, I heard, as we all did, the requirement to put in a program like this, hiring 37 new municipal law enforcement officials. But it also added that it would require a similar number of fire prevention officers. I guess I'd like to ask staff if they still stand behind that, both those numbers, because it's not just 37. If we're talking about trying to establish a business case, I think we would need to understand the full scope of those staffing requirements.
Yes, okay. Through the chair, the 37 number was from an analysis we did in a previous report, and that represents full annual inspections of all townhouse and apartment units. And under the rental licensing program that we have in place right now, which only focuses on singles, duplex, triplex, fourplex, and converted dwellings, we do now proactive property standard inspections as well as proactive fire inspections. So the number would be 37 MLEOs and also likely 37 additional fire prevention officers.
Which
that is based on full annual inspections, and not like Toronto where they might pick certain buildings to do full annual, but some buildings that are in better shape might do once every 3 years.
Okay, that's Chair through you.
Go ahead.
Thanks, I appreciate that. So obviously the potential for this to be an exceptionally expensive staffing decision. What I'm trying to understand is if staff could provide us with some kind of analysis of the origin of complaints that we're receiving by property type. I'm thinking semis, townhouses, apartments, single detached. I'm not sure I saw that in the report. Forgive me if it was there. I'm not sure I saw that. But is that information at hand? I note that when staff indicate that less than 1% of the complaints for interior issues are from apartments. But I'm just trying to understand the balance in terms of where those complaints are coming from. Do we have any information to help support our understanding of the study?
Yeah, yes, through the chair, as Mr. Hefferton indicated in his presentation, and the numbers are not in the report because we just ran them this week. So generally we trend around 8,000 complaints, property related complaints a year. This year we're already trending a little higher. So we're at around 4,700 complaints. Of those complaints, 37 have been for interior non-compliance issues in apartments.
Okay. So Chair, through you, I'm not sure that this is a one solution fits all issues. And that's what I'm trying to get my head around. Look, we're all trying to be mindful of anyone in our city that lives in less than ideal conditions. We have a process for that, but what struck me about the report, Chair, that I read were the communications efforts that have come through this report from staff after they've analyzed the Rent Safe Toronto program. And what I'm trying to be mindful of is, you try to balance care with cost and what makes sense and try to deal with problems that are truly problems. And I don't think any of us would disagree with that. And I'm not sure that the Toronto solution is the London solution. I'm mindful of those who live in, again, less than stellar conditions, but I would say to you that we've got some very specific suggestions that have come out of this study. So good for staff and also for council for directing staff to provide further information on the Rent Safe Toronto program. But it strikes me that if one of the things that we're looking to do is to dramatically increase communication opportunities in those areas where it's needed. And, is that around affordable housing? Is that around certain, maybe it's all buildings. I say this as a tenant myself, but I like the steps that staff have taken in terms of the actions that they're not just considering, but if I've read this correctly, they intend to implement. And it would seem to me that's the next logical step before we embrace significant cost, which could potentially be in some millions of dollars, that I think could more appropriately be directed in a way that does improve not just tenant safety conditions, but I think really calls on I'll say the individuals who caused the problems. So let's say it's a bad landlord, call those out and frankly, get those up to a certain condition and a standard. But it starts with understanding, I think, the full complexity of what the issue is. And strikes me that I think what staff have come back with is absolutely the next logical step. If for any reason, as we go forward, if that isn't working, then I think we have the ability to consider going to another step. But to immediately just throw money at the situation and throw all landlords into this mix it doesn't make practical sense to me. And I think we all want to be practical and thoughtful. I'm just not sure this is it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And so while you were speaking closer to the beginning, I did notice that Councillor Hillier was offering to second Councillor Helmer's motion, so we have it moved and seconded. With that, I will go to Councillor Van Holst and then to Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate the debate. My concern is that we spend money administratively that could otherwise be spent fixing up apartments. And the first thing I want to do is understand the audit fees. So it says here on page 72 of the written report, an administrative fee of $1,900 and an inspection fee of $115 per hour. And then I'm looking at 47,000 rental units. Could I be corrected? I don't think it's $2,000 per unit that we would be charging, because that would be an expense of $94 million coming out of the rental industry for just administrative things. But perhaps through you, I could get clarification from our staff.
Mr. Hefferton?
Through you, Chair. I do see the fees that you're referring to, Councillor, and essentially these are all obviously the Rent Safe Toronto figures, and it would be the administrative fee for the audit would be $1,900, as well as the inspector would be approximately $115 per hour, and that is what's required by the Rent Safe Toronto program.
Councillor, go ahead, Councillor.
And yes, and that's per unit.
No, that would be per building.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So that's significantly different then. Okay. Although still, I look at $115 per hour to hire an inspector regularly versus, and that's going to be paid by the landlord. Boy, don't we wish they would just go ahead and hire somebody for that amount to make some repairs. And so there's one of my concerns. My next question is just about the success we've had with the changes that we did implement. So I think this has come to us before. The request for a Rent Safe London, and the name is great. It sounds like something we should obviously do just because of the words. But what we did was say that we would go around the Landlord Tenant Act and take on some challenges ourselves, particularly with infestations like bed bugs, etc. And I know I've had buildings in my ward where that was a problem, and staff was dealing with that. Can you tell us about the successes or non-successes of what we've done with those changes?
Through the chair, we work very closely with our partners at the Health Unit and the Fire Prevention Office in addressing property standard complaints, both proactively under the rental licensing bylaw and reactively in response to complaints. One of the largest improvements over the last several years has been the introduction of administrative monetary penalties. Because as you heard this evening, and as you hear at every delegation or public meeting that involves rental housing, is the issue of absentee landlords with no local contact. And that has been a longstanding issue for us in terms of getting issues addressed where there are issues regarding absentee landlords. And under the previous system, in terms of the consequences of non-compliance and issuing charges, serving of tickets on to absentee landlords was very difficult. We had to connect with either police services across the country and province or bylaw offices and courier over the ticket, and hopefully that the person, the landlord, will be found. Under administrative monetary penalties, it's a penalty in the mail or email. And since that time, we have issued 276 administrative monetary penalties to landlords that are non-compliant with the rental licensing program. And that number increases almost weekly.
Counselor.
Thank you very much. I'm pleased to hear that we're having a more efficient process. However, can you tell me some of the outcomes of that?
Mr. Gatola.
Yes, through the chair, the outcomes are that there are consequences for non-compliance. So prior to the administrative monetary penalty system, there was very few charges laid. Under the current system, it's easy to lay administrative monetary penalties for non-compliance, and continued non-compliance can result in doubling of the penalty. The other issue that we are doing over the last, say, 10 years is identifying the worst buildings, and most are vacant, and bringing reports to council for demolition of those buildings. We also have the authority to take actions where property owners do not take actions. So upwards of 500 properties we clean on a yearly basis in terms of removing derelict vehicles, addressing debris and garbage issues, but also in rare occasions where there is non-compliance with property standards, we do contract a private roofing company to install a new roof so that the tenants could live in safe environments.
Counselor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Now that to me sounds like an excellent program and an excellent approach where we just make sure that the repairs or the changes are done rather than have just a bigger bureaucracy. So I wonder if our staff could address and the issue of not supporting the rent safe approach, but give us a sense of how an increasing number of complaints or an increasing number of types of complaints could be addressed through our administrative monetary penalty system. And perhaps with that, what is possible for the city to simply contract on their own that would be relevant to the people inquiring today.
Yes, through the chair, our complaint system is currently serviced through Service London, which is they use a sophisticated software system in terms of receiving complaints, administering them, mapping them, and distributing them to various areas. And what we've done in the past, as I mentioned previously, is identified through heat maps where there's a concentration of valid complaints, and we have blitzed neighborhoods where there are those valid complaints. Now, we do education beforehand. We don't just kind of show up in neighborhoods and start knocking on doors. It's very much advertised. It's a lot of discussions with the ward councillors, and in many cases, the ward councillors have had media releases in those neighborhoods. Now, over the last several years, we have not done these blitzes for obvious reasons, but certainly when we do a heat map and identify areas that have a large propensity of valid complaints, we can certainly do a proactive blitz in that neighborhood if it's justified. And from a return on investment, ROI perspective, civic administration prefers that model rather than hiring a number of staff and going out through neighborhoods, through all apartments over a certain time period. Because the reality is we will be going into several apartments and finding nothing. Our preference is to blitz areas which have a propensity of valid property standard complaints.
Thank you, Mr. Katolik. Councillor Van Holst.
Madam Chair, I think our staff have proposed and are implementing a better approach for London than the Rent Safe Toronto. And what my hopes are is that perhaps through some further public engagement, we can communicate how that works. And I think the kind of uptake that Rent Safe Toronto has seen, we would also see, but be able to come up with some better outcomes than we would were we to just adopt this essentially licensing system. So I appreciate the answers, and I think that's I agree with the direction that staff is proposing, having heard a little more about it. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll go to you, Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know why you feel like I'm still a member of CAPS, because I keep coming to your meetings, even though I'm not a voting member. But I did see that Councillor Helmer has his hand up again, and I know he indicated he might have to drop off. Since he is a voting member, if he'd like the floor first, I'd yield to him, and then I'll share my comments after. I want to be respectful of the fact that he indicated he may have to drop off. So
no, see his. I saw his hand. It had just stayed up, Councillor Lewis. But thank you for that. But and I would have checked in on him, but he took it down. So
okay, just wanted to make sure that I wasn't depriving him of an opportunity to speak in case he has to leave. I will. I just want to share a few thoughts on this, and I certainly am probably helping contribute to Mr. Katolik's spike in cases to the point in time we are at this year. There's been quite a number of property standards complaints in Ward 2. I would concur, and maybe this is more reflective of the makeup of the ward than the demographics across London, but it seems to be these converted units, and especially those, well, frankly, where absentee landlords are trying to really pack people in to maximize their dollars, that are causing the most stress, whether it's exterior or interior upkeep of the property. That seems to be the primary problem I'm coming across in Ward 2. And I certainly would be supportive, quite frankly, if Mr. Katolik needed a couple more bylaw officers to respond to those, to entertain the budget ask that he might need for those. That said, I would echo the mayor's thoughts. I'm not sure that, given what's in the report, and Councillor Van Holst's thoughts as well, given what's in the report today, and the steps that our staff are taking, I quite honestly wouldn't be supportive of moving a business case forward right now and asking staff to put the additional work that goes into a business case development for us before we've really had a full chance to see what the steps they've proposed or outlined in this report have an opportunity to do. I certainly know that the reporting system is one that I've heard from advocates is not their preferred or easy to navigate method. And I think the staff is addressing that in terms of a number to call, a simple email where all the property standards complaints go, because I know certainly that enforcement at london.ca gets a lot more than just property standards complaints. So again, I think we have seen some steps taken, and there's some more steps outlined in this report that can simplify things, and I'm very supportive of those measures. But I think it does come back to focusing in the resources on the problems rather than pursuing a licensing regime that's going to include everybody, including those, the overwhelming majority, I would say, actually, of landlords who are not a problem. Most landlords are good landlords. They mean well. I would say, and through you, a comment that I would share with Ms. Devine, I've had a York Developments complaint that's come across my desk as well. They've dealt with it pretty quickly. And so you might want to also reach out to your ward councillor and see if they can help. I found that to be a property management company that has been responsive, certainly when I've contacted them. I hear that your experience has maybe not been so positive, but I wanted to share that perhaps reaching out through your councillor might help. I've certainly been willing to have those conversations, but I think that it comes back to, the made in London solution is not necessarily what works in Toronto. Perhaps Toronto's benefiting from economies of scale that they have. The fact that they may be able to do these inspections without a whole lot of travel in between some of the buildings. In the auditing, I'm cautious of results because obviously the numbers can look better depending on what buildings are being sampled in a given year. So those numbers might be reflective just of the fact that they're moving around to different areas and there are different conditions in different areas as well. So I'd be hesitant to add on a layer of additional bureaucracy at this time. I think that there's some really good things in this report the staff have outlined that we should be pursuing that I hope would make a difference. I think Mr. Katolik's comments about the effectiveness and the benefit of AMPS is very noteworthy, and this has been a pretty new thing for us. So it's something that we're still going to be assessing the value of as it rolls forward. But I'm going to continue to listen to the discussion because the one thing I do certainly agree with Councillor Helmer on is this is a problem. It is a big problem across the city. I know people often feel like the city is not listening. And I would say the other piece to me here that it comes back to, and I think it was Councillor Van Holst's comments. I don't disagree with people who say the landlord-tenant tribunal isn't working. I really don't. But in fact, I would say it's broken. And I think that the provincial representatives in this city and across this province need to have some pressure applied to them to get it fixed. We can't have the municipality backfilling provincial responsibilities, and that system has to be fixed. 100 different municipalities across the province dealing with this in different manners isn't going to give tenants a long-term benefit in our community or others. The province needs to fix that system. And so I think we have to also stay in our respective lane there in terms of, and that can be from us too.
You're coming up to 6 minutes now, Councillor.
Sorry about that, Madam Chair. I got really long-winded there. But that was what my wrap-up point was, that I think there has to be some real pressure applied to the province too, because they play a significant role in this and we can't replace them in that regard.
Thank you. And I didn't interrupt you because I felt like you were wrapping up, but then you got ramped up again. So any other discussion on this? So I wonder if Councillor Hamou, if you would take the chair for me.
Thank you.
So thank you. And this has been a great discussion. And I also agree that this is a really good report from staff. I like the information that it contains, and I like the direction that they want to go in and have indicated that they will be going in. But I don't think it hurts to ask for a business case and in the multi-year budget. And we're looking at over a year from now. So I know Councillor Van Holst mentioned that we haven't yet given this a chance to work to see if they're going to have any positive results from some of the things that they are implementing now, but we will have a chance before this business case even really gets started, before they start working on it in earnest. well over a year before the next council starts working on the multi-year budget. A lot of the things that Mr. Katolik spoke about, like repairing roofs and things like that, those are things that are already happening because there is partly because there is a licensing system in place with the small landlords. So those smaller landlords that have units of 4 or less have to be licensed and have to comply with the rules. And when they are not complying, and the city has a lot of consequences that can be put in place to ensure that compliance. We are spending money, and all the things that staff are recommending will cost the city money. Through a possible hypothetical licensing regime, there will be revenue that will then pay for the money that the city is spending already to deal with some of these issues that tenants are facing. And also, we talk about, it's not fair to put all of this on good landlords as well. So this is what the business case will give us, all of that information. So perhaps the fees can be kept low. And then we would look at things like if an audit is required based, or more in-depth inspections are required based on what just some of the annual or regular inspections reveal, then whatever fines or consequences, monetary consequences are imposed on those landlords that are not doing the things they should do and not doing right by their tenants. I see those kinds of penalties and fines helping to pay for the program. But again, this is all very hypothetical, and it's because we don't have information, so we don't know what we don't know. And we have not, to one of Councillor Van Holst's comments, we asked staff, the only reason we talked about Rent Safe Toronto in a previous committee is because Councillor Helmer brought it up and asked staff to look at the Rent Safe Toronto program and the direction is written right in this report, that come back, do an evaluation of Rent Safe Toronto and how that could possibly be implemented here in London. As I said, I really like the direction staff has gone. I really like those 4 changes, improvements that they are seeking to make. And by all means, we have to continue and do that, make those improvements. I do not think that there will be harm done. And at this point in time, asking staff, looking forward, to wrap their minds around the idea of a business case to create a similar type of regime that exists in Toronto through the Rent Safe Toronto program. Nobody is asking them to go and duplicate exactly what's happening in Toronto. Absolutely, come back to us with a made in London solution and accompany that with a business case to bring to the next multi-year budget discussions, which are over a year away.
Thank you. Councillor, Councillor Helmer is on the speaker's list.
So I will take the chair back. Thank you so much, Councillor Hamou. I will go to you, Councillor Helmer, and then to you, the mayor.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thoughtful comments from colleagues. I guess what I want to emphasize in terms of why I think it's useful to look at a business case for Rent Safe London is it has the virtue of being a proactive program. It's wide in its scope in that it touches a lot of the larger buildings where the majority of renters live. And we could vary, the frequency of the required evaluations. In Toronto, buildings are required to be evaluated every 3 years. Obviously, if you wanted to make the program a little bit cheaper overall to administer, you could make it every 4 years, and you would be giving up, potentially there could be more problems that develop over a year, but you certainly would not have to do as many inspections, and so you'd be cutting down on the number of building evaluations. That has to be the primary driver of the cost of the program. So, I don't want to be so stubborn as to say it has to be every 3 years. It seems like it's working pretty well in Toronto. It's only the buildings that score badly in the evaluations that are subject to the full audit. And I think that makes sense, right? Where you don't, do the full audit on every system in the building and all that stuff, or a building that seems to be in great shape when you do the evaluation. You really just do that for the ones that seem to be problematic. And from an overall cost perspective, forget the cost to the city for administering the program, but there's a cost to letting these problems develop. There's a cost to letting them deteriorate over time and become more expensive to fix. And I think the proactive evaluation, audit, and disclosure program, which is what Rent Safe Toronto is the cheapest way overall. The best, I guess the cheapest thing would be if every landlord just had maintained their buildings and all their systems to the point where they didn't fail. But I've been in buildings where someone was stuck in the elevator when I came into the building. I talked to the person and I said, how often does this happen? And they're like, this is a regular occurrence, right? People are like, building elevators are breaking down, windows are broken, doors are broken, they don't lock. Like, there's just basic things that need to be done. And this is not like a limited number of buildings. It's like there's a lot of buildings that have these kind of problems in our city right now. And they don't get all reported is not to say that the problem doesn't actually exist. And so I think the proactive one, it identifies those problems, we find them. Just the mere existence of the program will encourage landlords to go and fix those things faster and to deal with them before the city says, you've got a problem, we need to fix it. So I think even the existence of the program and the fact that they need to be evaluated every couple of years, it's going to encourage the worst performing landlords to become more like the best performing landlords, which is wonderful. And hopefully when we do the evaluations, people are scoring higher. But I think there's a lot of value in this approach. Toronto really is leading the way in terms of developing this kind of proactive evaluate, audit, proactive compliance kind of approach to building. They haven't solved every problem, right? There's still lots of problems in Toronto in terms of living conditions that the tenants are facing. But I do think it's a much better overall approach, and I think there's a lot of value in it. So I hope people will support at least getting a business case. Maybe we can look at options like a 3 years evaluation cycle, maybe a 4-year evaluation cycle, if that's something that people want to look at for cost reasons. I think that there's a lot of value in that, and I hope people will be supportive at least of taking this next step, because I don't think the things that are identified by staff, those will make some marginal improvements, but until we start being proactive, I think we're going to be missing a lot of the problems and pushing the cost onto the tenants to be the ones reporting every single issue that we run into. And I think we have enough tenants in the city that it's something we can do collectively, come together and do something like Rent Safe London. So hopefully people will support the business case.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Mayor.
Thanks very much, Chair. Look, I think everyone has provided a number of thoughtful comments on this issue. I will not be supporting proceeding with the business case. Any of the dollars associated with the administrative costs of all this doesn't fix one window, doesn't help one elevator, doesn't do those things. This is about, from my standpoint, accountability and responsibility. We have a process which our staff have come back with and said that there are improvements that can be made on the communication side. And my view is that has to play out. If we're going to be spending monies, and we've heard Mr. Patolo talk about the 37, just on this basis here, the 37 officers, law enforcement officers that have to be hired, and basically an equal number of fire prevention officers. From my standpoint, I'd like to see windows fixed and doors fixed and maintenance done and that kind of a thing. It's not like the impression that I'm feeling that is being given is that these landlords are just running rampant over tenants in this city. There is a process which we are looking to improve from a communication standpoint to let tenants know that there is a process that they can use. If that's not being heard, all of the additional staff that we're now looking to put in doesn't do anything to fix it. To me, again, it's about accountability and responsibility. And I feel that what we're doing is we're laying it on staff in some fashion that somehow that they're not dealing with the problem. If we need more staff to help deal with some of the accountability problems, maybe that's a discussion we have, but I sincerely believe We've got to allow the process that in good faith, we as a council requested, staff do, which they have undertaken. I think that has to run its course. This issue of ready, fire, aim, to me, just doesn't make sense without giving this a true chance to run its course. And again, if it doesn't work, then from our standpoint, and we need a different resource approach, I'd be the first to stand in line to say, then we need to take a different approach. We went to staff. They have come back with a series of recommendations that I think are genuine, legitimate, help give tenants an outlet. But to imagine that somehow hiring additional inspectors or officials in upwards of some 74 by my count here is somehow going to fix a window. It's not going to do that. If the process is so besieged that we don't have enough process to help people have that outlet to express their concerns, okay, but that's not what I've heard. And so the notion of just simply throwing people at it to fix the problem comes back to the earlier comment. One solution does not fit all. And so if we're not going to charge every landlord for the costs of these various inspections, and I heard someone say earlier, I believe it might have been Councillor Lewis, that most landlords are good landlords. And I'll take that as a premise. The bad ones are the ones that we're trying to deal with. Hitting us the way that we are, even with a business case, suggests that we're not prepared to give this a chance. And I'm for one that thinks that that's wrong. I think our staff do a great job with this, and I would like to see this play out. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Helmer, is your hand up anew, or is that your old hand? Oh, great, thank you. And Mr. Mayor, same question I could ask of you. Is there any further discussion on this? Okay, so it's an e-scribe. We have a motion on the floor. It's been moved and seconded. We've had ample discussion on this. The motion is in e-scribe if you would like to look at it. It says that the following actions be taken with respect to the report dated June 21st, 2022, related to Rent Safe TO program and complaint process. A, the Civic Administration be directed to bring forward a business case that would provide for the implementation of a Rent Safe London housing enforcement program for consideration during the next multi-year budget development. B, the staff report dated June 21st, 2022, with respect to this matter, be received. I can call those in two separates. So let's deal with A first, which is the business case for the next multi-year budget. It's been moved and seconded. I will call the question on part A only.
Councillor Salee voting manually yay.
Chair, I'll vote no.
So Mo Salee, Councillor Salee is voting yay. The mayor is voting no, and Councillor Helmer is voting yay. This is on part A.
Closing the vote, the motion fails 3-3.
Okay, that leaves us to part B, which is receiving the staff report. It's been moved and seconded, and I'll call that question.
Salee with a yay.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, if you've indicated your vote, you were muted at the time.
It was a great vote. Sorry, Chair, I voted yes.
Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you.
I'm in favor as well.
Thank you, Councillor.
Closing the vote, the motion.
Sorry, that takes us now to, there are no scheduled items. It takes us to items for direction. And at 4.1, we have a request for delegation status. I'll look to committee to provide me with direction on how you want to proceed with the request. So moved by Councillor Hamou that we receive the delegation. Do I have a second? Thank you, Councillor Hillier, seconded by Councillor Hillier. I will call the vote on that.
Chair, I'll vote yes. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, from Sally.
Thank you, Councillor Sally.
I'll vote yes, but I also have to leave the meeting, so.
Thank you, Councillor Helmer. Thanks for sticking around.
I'm a yes.
Councillor Hamou is a yes.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 6-0.
So our delegate is here, I believe. Mr. Pierce?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, you have 5 minutes to address the committee. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm part of a group asking for permission to use Gibbons Park this coming Foco-Hoco, Western Foco-Hoco on September 24th. City rules state that we cannot have a ticketed event. They will not allow ticketed events except for Rock the Park, and they will not allow restricted entry events. We want to do both. I can backtrack here, talking about Western students. They live in a who you know world. Academics, they choose a university based on academics, but they also choose it based on the ability to create a social network while at school. Okay, the better the social network you can create, the better the school is perceived to be. University students see Queens, McMaster, McGill, etc., as academically equivalent, but they may not see a university as being socially equivalent. Universities need to be seen as a safe and social place to spend your university career. An unsafe university, or the perception of an unsafe university, is the kiss of death. Which brings me to what's currently going on Broughdale during Foco-Hoco, okay? The city's playing with fire. Anybody can attend that thing, or that event. A single incident at that event could reverberate for years. We read in the newspaper about a family run over on Hyde Park Road. We read in the newspaper about a fitness instructor stabbed on Richmond Street. We read in the newspaper about a student who died at Western Road and Sarnia Road last year. We read in the newspaper about a student repeatedly stalking the campus. What we think is the students would get a safer HOCO if it was moved to a location where the attendees could be. Hello?
Sorry, go ahead. Councillors, if you have your microphone unmuted, can you please remute? Go ahead, Mr. Scott Pierce. I stopped your
Okay.
clock and I'll start it again.
Okay. We think that that event, the student gathering on Broughdale would be better. It would be better for the city if it was moved to a location where the attendees could be screened and vetted. Okay. We have been doing this for years. We only sell tickets through Western Student Council, through Western social networks. You need a student card to buy a ticket. Okay, that means we know who's coming and we know who's inside, rather than Broughdale Ave where no one knows who's there at all. Okay, and this event in Broughdale, if we moved it to Gibbons Park like we want to, it's only a few short blocks from Broughdale, which is advantageous for us. But my point is, it's not a new event. We're moving an existing event to a location which would be safer. The city will also not allow ticketed events. They've made they let Rock the Park be ticketed, but other events cannot be ticketed. Students need to be offered a safe, they need something. They need a Foco Hoco, which is safe, which is entertaining, and which gets students off of Broughdale Ave. And that's not going to happen for free. So clearly we have to finance it some way. Tickets need to be sold. This is not our first rodeo. If you read the newspaper on St. Patrick's Day past, they expected it was going to turn into a gong show because restrictions were lifted and the weather was unusually warm.
You have 30 seconds, sir.
Okay, so what they said was no problems in downtown London. Everybody is at our event. Okay, so we need the park. We need a bigger location in order to hit a critical mass. In order to take all the students off of Broughdale, we need that size of a location. We've been doing it in a smaller location. We don't need to go to a bigger location. And if we can do that, we can keep those students safe and secure. Okay, that's my point.
Thank you. And pretty good timing right there. Thank you so much. Okay, so what I'm going to go to next is to city staff to see if there's any comment from city staff on this request. Go ahead, Ms. Smith.
The chair, I can start. Thank you. As per our special events policy, Harris Park was designed for signature events. And it's as Mr. Scott Pierce is correct, is the only park in London where admissions or gate fees may be charged. And further to that, our special events policy allows for permits to be issued for events. They must be that are ticketed or gated, but they must be open to the public. And that the admission or gate fees must go towards a registered charity or a not-for-profit group or organization. So currently, there is 5 major events, up to 12 days of amplified music is allowed at Harris Park. And currently we have 8 days that are booked. So there's 4 days remaining. But that is the only park in London where admission or gate fees may be charged according to our current policy.
Councillor Hillier.
Yes, a question for staff. Do we have the infrastructure at Gibbons Park regarding the electrical and the water?
Is that you, Ms. Davison, or is that Ms. Smith?
I have Mr. Stafford on the line. He can speak to the amenities at Gibbons Park.
Perfect. Go ahead, Mr. Stafford.
Thank you, and through the chair. There are no amenities at Gibbons Park. There is a field house, there is a washroom there, but it's not a designed event park. The designed event parks are Harris Park and Victoria Park, and that's where our infrastructure has gone to support events of this size.
Thank you.
That's it, Councillor Hillier? Okay, good. Anything Any other questions for staff? Did you, I see you, Ms. Davison, and I love seeing your face, and I want you to keep your face on screen. Did you have something to add too?
Yes, with respect to Gibbons Park, we're also very concerned about access to the park for emergency vehicles. There's also limited parking. And the fact that the poles don't have power on them would mean that we couldn't have cameras in the park. So there are security concerns with that park.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Davison. So I look to committee for direction and guidance. We can receive this delegation or we can do whatever somebody wants to do if you have a motion to put on the floor. Mr. Councillor Mayor Holder, sorry, Mr. Mayor, go ahead.
Someday I might elevate my position to be a councillor, but today you're just stuck with me as mayor. I'd like to thank the presenter for his report, and I'd like to receive his presentation and take no action.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I see a seconder in Councillor Hillier. Councillor Van Hulst, do you have, and any further comments, Mr. Mayor? You, can I move on? Oh, good. I see your hand went down. Thank you. Councillor Van Hulst.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The presenter seems to have presented, I think, a pretty good idea to deal with that date. And I wonder what staff suggests in terms now, is Harris Park or Victoria Park available on that date?
Ms. Davison.
Thank you for the question to your chair. We're working with the Western University as a community partner on the homecoming events for September this year. The good thing is that the university football game is planned to be on campus this year, and the university is planning a number of events on campus associated with homecoming. The importance of homecoming is very well known in the community, and it surrounds the Weston experience. And that's why it's important for us to keep that connection with campus. And the thought is that that will attract some students to campus. The reality is that the students will choose where they go to socialize, and we can't mandate any particular activity. And we are hoping that through our partnership with Weston, we'll be able to make it an attractive day for them.
Thank you, Ms. Davison. Councillor Van Hulst.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of gated parks, if we were to change our policy so that another park could take gated events, of course the infrastructure would have to be there, and we might need to add some infrastructure for that. But in that event, what would the next most likely park be for such a thing? Would it be Gibbons Park?
Through the chair, I can respond to the first part of it and then turn it over to Mr. Stafford. We are about to launch this summer a review of the Parks and Recreation bylaw that talks about what is and what isn't allowed in parks. And then following that, this fall, once special event seasons is over, we're doing a thorough review and update of our special events policy. So we will be looking at a holistic perspective across the city, at all of our parks, and where special events are held, the size of special events. We have neighborhood parks versus district parks. What does that mean? What can be held where? Both of these policies will go out for community consultation and then come to council early in 2023.
Councillor?
Well, thank you very much. So it certainly looks like there's opportunity to provide some input and perhaps influence the policy that would have us not go forward with this event this year, to possibly make it happen in a future year. So thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Any other comments? Okay. Oh, Counselor Hamou, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, I just wanted to thank Mr. Pierce for his presentation. I do like the fact that he is thinking outside the box. And if we can't make it happen this year, then we'll try to figure things out in the future. Thanks.
Okay. Counselor Van Holst, is your hand up again?
No, Madam Chair, I guess I just didn't take that down.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. So thank you. Thank you again, Mr. Scott Pierce, for making your delegation today. And we have a vote on the, or a motion on the floor now, so I will call that vote.
Chair, I'll vote yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor votes yes.
I'll vote nay, Councillor Sully.
Thank you, Councillor Sully. That was a yes, right, Councillor Sully?
Sorry, it took forever to unmute. No, I voted nay.
You voted no to receiving and take no action?
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-1.
So that takes us to the deferred matters list. And we are going to deal with item 1 on the deferred matters list first, because one of our councillors has a conflict that he would like to abstain from. Do I have a mover and a seconder for item 1 on the deferred matters list? Moved by Councillor Hamou, seconded by?
I'll second, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'll call the question.
Yay
Yes.
from Councillor Sully.
And I'm with Councillor Sully.
Thank you both.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 4-0 with 1 abstain.
The rest of the deferred matters list, do I have a mover for the remaining items on the deferred matters list? Moved by Councillor Hillier, thank you. Seconded by Councillor Hamou. I will call the question.
I'll vote with Steve, Councillor Hillier. Thank you. Yes.
Yay from Sully.
Thank you both.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
All right, that is the extent of our public agenda. We have one item on the confidential agenda. It is a confidential information supplied by Canada, matter pertaining to information explicitly supplied in confidence to the municipality by the Government of Canada. I will look for a mover and a seconder to go in camera. Moved by Councillor Hamou, seconded by Councillor Hillier. I'll call the question.
Yay from Sully.
And yes, thank you, Chair, from the Mayor.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 5-0.
While we do all the things we need to do. Okay, we are ready to rock and roll. Can you please show me your faces? There we go. And I see Councillor Salih's virtual hand. So I will go to the Councillor Hamou, who's here with us, to report out.
Thank you, Chair. Progress was made for a matter that was discussed in camera.
Thank you so much for that. And we are done with our agenda, so I will just look for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Hamou, seconded by Councillor Hillier. By show of hands, all those in favor? And I see Councillor Salih's virtual hand indicating yes. Thank you, everybody. Have a great evening.